Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I hadn't intended to talk today about Lord's reform, but was provoked by the Honourable Member for North Southwark and Bermondsey. And one of the things he said in his comments was that one of the reasons for House of Lords reform was to encourage more gender diversity in the House of Lords. And I would point out to him, though he is not in his seat right at this moment, that there are actually more men in the House of Commons today, not actually in this actually in this chamber as well today, than there have ever been women elected to this place. And so I think we need to, when we're talking about reform, look at reform across the board in Parliament, not just in the House of Lords. And my principal objection, I'll give
I mean, I agree with the point she's making, but does that mean that she agrees that we should have a fairer system of voting to both Houses of Parliament?
Continue. One of the principal objections I have to the current proposals in House of Lords reform is the argument that we're making it more accountable by allowing people to be elected for a single term of 15 years and without being able to stand for re-election. I cannot see in a democratic system how that is accountable. We in this House have to face the electorate now every 5 years, and we have seen over the years colleagues who have lost their seats because the electorate have made the decision either about their party or about the individual. That is true accountability, and although it has been weakened, I think, by the proposals to change the boundaries every 5 years, where there will be some electors who will never have a chance to vote again for the MP that has represented them. And I think this government is doing great damage in both houses in reducing accountability of members of this Parliament, and I think that is a backward step, and it's being dressed up as reform, but that is an element that we really need to examine and improve on if we're really going to see change. And I should say that I come at this as a Democrat. I do believe we have to have even an element of hereditary in the House of Lords is completely out beyond the pale and out of kilter with modern attitudes, and quite rightly so. But we do need to make sure that we don't rush so headlong into trying to improve it, that any change is seen as a better option. We need to make measured steps in making sure that this Parliament properly represents the people, that we're not filling the House of Lords with stooges selected by party leaders who never, ever have to face the electorate. So I look forward to the debates on it, but I have to say, on the doorsteps in my constituency has not been raised once during the most recent election campaign, and indeed in the previous, I'm usually out on doorsteps a couple of times a month doing roving surgeries. And the last time I canvassed opinion in my constituency, everybody I canvassed said that they supported a democratically elected House of Lords, save for one constituent of Nigerian origin who believed that there was some merit in the hereditary principle. But I think he was a lone voice compared with everyone else. So we do need to see democracy, but not in the way that's being proposed. But if I turn overall to the Queen's speech, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is a big disappointment. I actually was watching the Queen's speech and suddenly realised it was nearly over before some of the main issues that I had hoped would be in the Queen's speech were announced. It is very flimsy, but overall it has no compelling vision about what this government wants to achieve in this country. The opening sentence is one we would agree with, but it then is not backed up by proposed legislation. And there is no strategic approach to the economic crisis. We hear repeatedly the issue of tackling the deficit, but there are other issues which I will touch on later on in my speech that need to be tackled alongside the acknowledgement that we do obviously need to make sure that the government's that we are approaching the country's finances appropriately. And I do think that this speech demonstrates how this government is out of touch, unfair, and increasingly we're seeing signs of incompetence, Mr Deputy Speaker. At least the Prime Minister today acknowledged that the economy is the higher priority over the House of Lords, but the gracious address does very little to tackle it, and I'm particularly concerned about businesses in my constituency and unemployment, which I'll touch on. And the unfairness is demonstrated, I think, by the fact that we're seeing a retention of the cut in the 50p rate of tax, helping the top 1% of earners in this country. And my constituents, many of them, are keen to work, but unable, for example, to find the extra 8 hours that they will need in order to continue to receive tax credits, and will be losing that tax credit. So at the one end you see families doing everything they should be doing, working hard, trying to work more, but unable to find those extra hours. And they just need extra hours with the same employer. It's hard to find another job at the moment. And at the other end, you see millionaires saving thousands of pounds in tax. That does not strike me or my constituents as fair, Mr Deputy Speaker. On incompetence, in the time today, luckily for the government, I don't have time to dwell on some of the incompetencies that we're seeing. But if we look at the issues around border controls, what a fiasco since last autumn. and it's continuing now, and very seriously, of course, in the run-up to the Olympics. The issues of youth unemployment rising, that I think is an incompetency that is structurally going to affect a generation of our young people and their families in turn. And of course, the ministerial dalliances with Sky B, which I haven't got time to go into, but demonstrate a real lack of appropriateness in government, if I'm putting it politely. In terms of the gracious speech itself, there are some things that I welcome. I've been a long-time supporter of the Green Investment Bank. My big concern is that it's coming too late, even though with £3 billion of funding, though not all absolutely certain funding, it has to be people have to be reminded. But will it move quickly enough to make sure that we secure the green investment we need in this country to create to help the businesses grow and create the jobs that we so desperately need? And I think that environmental ship would have sailed and gone to other ports, for example, in Germany, in China, in other areas of the world where the governments are far ahead of the game compared with this government. I also welcome flexible parental leave. I think this is important that people have the choice. I do think it's important that it's couched in the right way so that women don't feel forced to go back to work and pass over their care of the child that they may still be nursing to their partner. But I think that the principle of allowing families freedom over how they manage their own affairs is an important one. But overall, the government's economic policy is hurting and it is not working, not in my constituency. Unemployment is rising and it's the worst we've seen for 16 years. And of course, the youth unemployment, on which I'm on the record spoken about a number of times before, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a real scourge of our society. There are a couple of things that I do welcome in the bill. The Children and Families Bill, I welcome the intention to ensure that there's an all-through assessment for children and young adults. Too often I've had constituents who have found there have been breaks in the support that their child's had, whether it be a transfer of different school age or transition into adulthood. And personal budgets provide a real opportunity for those young people and their families to have control, as long as there are safeguards for the many families that I deal with who actually wouldn't be able to manage those budgets themselves. And I think we mustn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I welcome the personal budgets, but I do think that we need to make sure there's a safety net and support for those unable to do the necessary paperwork and manage the employment side of that. So the detail will matter if the good intentions in this bill are to be met, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on my own front bench to make sure that these needs are looked at. And I think that in terms of the Children and Families Bill generally, the bill talks, I imagine will hopefully talk about making sure that children are protected and supported. That seems to be the general feel. But I'm concerned that while the government on the one hand is looking at protecting and supporting certain groups of children, there are actions by other ministers in government around safeguarding. For example, suggestions that faith leaders would be exempt from vetting and, if necessary, exempt from being barred from working with children is a very worrying step. And I think that we need to be vigilant about making sure that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The government is very keen to talk about rolling back the frontiers of the state, keen to talk about rolling back red tape. But where the protection of children is concerned, and we put our children in the presence, and vulnerable adults too, of a stranger, we need to know sure that we have some surety that that stranger has been properly vetted. And I think it's not acceptable to rule out one group simply on the basis that they're faith leaders. Businesses in Hackney have been struggling for some time. We have some great successes. Silicon Roundabout is in my constituency, but these are very largely small startups, finding it hard to grow. And we have some very innovative business models in a very innovative part of London. But the businesses in Hackney are struggling to get loans and even in many cases an overdraft facility from their bank. And the Prime Minister spoke earlier about Merlin and saying it's worked and that the loan guarantee fund is generous. But it's not so much the level of the loan that's the issue, it's the fact that banks will not loan in the first place. And I think there's an opportunity, maybe not yet missed, but in the Queen's, in the gracious speech, we'll see when the detail of the legislation comes forward, to look at alternative funding methods for businesses, where with innovative businesses, there are innovators out there who are prepared to fund in a different way. And we need to make sure that they're properly supported, that there's regulation around them so that the investors and the businesses are protected. And of course, there's opportunities for more mutuals, which in the banking sector, which ought to be focusing on investment in their own area and with an understanding of that locality and of course owned by their members. That brings me on to one of the things that's missing from the bill, this gracious speech, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Co-operatives Consolidation Bill, which as a Co-op and Labour MP I was very keen to see debated during the next session. It is not here, Mr Deputy Speaker. Where has this bill gone? It is something that across the House there would have been support for. The last government did a great deal to change the law on cooperatives and improve and provide some new legislation that made it easier to set up cooperatives. But there was some room, because that was done on different piecemeal across different acts of Parliament, to bring that all together. And consolidation bills by their nature are complicated, are difficult, but it would have given an opportunity and a platform to introduce yet more opportunities for mutuals and cooperatives. And there's this feeling across this House, shared across all parties, not necessarily of every party, but within every party there are members who share the view that there needs to be a different way of doing business in this country. And if there isn't a better way of doing business than mutuals, where people own and benefit and see the direct outcomes of their ownership of organisations, then I don't know what there is. But there is no commitment to introduce any mutual models at all, as far as we can see so far. The water bill would have been an opportunity. The energy bill would have opportunities possibly for some mutual solutions. And of course the banking bill. We, I think, need new measures around demutualisation. And we've already missed an opportunity when Northern Rock was sold off to the highest bidder rather than being remutualised. And I think that if the House is united on the need for banking reform, why not saddle this with join this up with the idea of the mutual model, and make sure that businesses are supported by mutuals as well as individuals. The other element that's missing, and that is a concern to my constituents and myself, is the antisocial behaviour legislation that we hoped might be coming. I think there's a very confused message, Mr Deputy Speaker. A year ago, one whole year ago, the government's consultation on antisocial behaviour finished. So they've done the work, and yet 12 months on, there is no bill, as far as we can see in the greatest speech, that will deal with these issues. So a year ago, the government all but announced its intention to end ASBOs, but there is no bill to do this. So the police and residents are in a confused position. Where do they stand? The government regularly passes the buck to local police forces when asked and challenged on crime issues, but they're robbing them of the tools to do the job. ASBOs, we know, require better enforcement, and we accept that they're not perfect in every way, but they could be strengthened to deal better with the problem of repeat victimisation. And the government should be trying to build on what's in place and has been shown to work, rather than starting again from scratch. The government's got a plan, we hear, for a community trigger, which would only guarantee action if 5 different households reported the same incident. And if one person complains, for me, Mr Deputy Speaker, that's enough. That's an instance of antisocial behaviour that needs to be tackled. It should be taken seriously and investigated. Then we've got an alphabet soup of other proposals, a crime prevention injunction or a criminal behaviour order. But they don't do what they say on the tin. And I know from experience with gang injunctions in Hackney that it can take a very long time for agencies on the ground to get used to the new powers, for the Crown Prosecution Service to deal with them properly, for courts to understand them, and for them to actually embed. ASBOs, as I say, may not have been perfect, but they were in the language of my constituents and people up and down the country. People understood them, and the system understood them. And I think to throw them out and not actually have proper plans in place to replace them is a big mistake. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are a number of real challenges in my constituency. We've heard from others about youth unemployment, which is, in my constituency, 1 in 4 young people under the age of 24 is out of work, on an overall unemployment rate of 12.7%. These have an impact, a major impact on child poverty. There are still children in my constituency who turn up to school after a long summer holiday malnourished in September because their parents have had chaotic lifestyles and been unable to get them fed. Now, we would all support measures to get people into work, but to have a whole generation of young people unable to get that work and that work experience will lead through, I fear, to greater challenges for their own children in future. And if we look at the ethnic breakdown of unemployment, and I haven't got time to go into all the figures, but just take young black men, over 50%, around 55% of young black men are out of work. That is a staggering figure and much higher than the general norm, and I think risks a real divide in this country if it's not tackled. It may not be an issue for every honourable member in this House. As the honourable member for Stratford-upon-Avon said, his is not a kaleidoscope county. Well, let me tell you that my constituency is a kaleidoscope constituency, as are many others, and it is important and a great strength of our area that we have that, but we must not have one group of people so badly affected by government policy. And there are other issues that have not been tackled. As we see housing benefit levels cut, rents continue to rise in my constituency to a great deal, and we've seen house prices rise as well. This is means there's a real challenge on housing and homes for my constituents, and there is nothing in this Queen's speech to tackle that, and I think that is a very serious mistake. And it demonstrates again, Mr Deputy Speaker, how the government is very much out of touch with what really matters to people. Families want to be in a position to support themselves, and my constituents are very limited in their requirements in many respects. They're not as demanding as they should be, I believe, but they do what they want is a job. They want a good school for their child, a health service that will work, and they want to know that they'll be able to afford a home, a roof over their heads. Well, the job and the roof over their heads are particular challenges at the moment. And so while we have these esoteric debates in the Westminster Village about House of Lords reform, an issue not once raised on the doorstep, I would rather see that energy, much as I think we do need to reform the House of Lords, right now, that energy, the energy of this place, should be focused on how we move this country forward, how we invest in jobs and growth, and we make sure that we are creating job opportunities and homes for constituents in my constituency and up and down the country.
Yeah.